Hi, my name is Carlo Volpe,
And I'm Desmond Silva.
and welcome to Centerville Voice. Hey everybody, welcome to Centerville Voice. My name is Carlo, and my good friend Desmond. What's up, Desmond?
Not much, we call
Not much, buddy. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you so much everybody for listening, for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube, and don't forget to hit the notification bell as well, so you'll be notified every time we have a new episode. Des, tonight we're going to talk about critical race theory.
Yep.
So that word has been thrown around a lot. I'm not sure if a lot of people know about it, but let's get right into it. Without further ado, I'm going to go right to Britannica.com. So Encyclopedia Britannica, as you know, trusted source, right? One of the good sources out there. So I'll get right to it. Critical race theory is defined as the intellectual movement and loosely organized framework of legal analysis based on the premise that race is not a natural, biological, grounded feature of physical distinct subgroups of human beings, but a social construct, culturally invented, a category that is used to oppress and exploit people of color. Critical race theory holds that the law and legal institutions in the United States are inherently racist insofar as they function to create and maintain social, economic, and political inequities between whites and non-whites, especially African Americans. So that's the definition of critical race theory. And for a lot of people, I just want to say that haven't heard that, I was a little bit surprised on actually what it entailed. I kind of thought that, and just be honest, I kind of thought there was just the idea that white people are to blame and just, in any kind of way. But it's interesting to actually say that, but it's saying that the United States is inherently racist, and that's really, really strong words. Like, I don't know. What do you think about that? Like,
if you're talking about the United States back in like the 1960s or even the 1970s, yeah, sure. Are there racist people in the United States? Yes. Are there remnants of racist systems in the United States? There are remnants of them that are there, but they are slowly being pulled away. And this has been happening like since the 1960s. They've been slowly pulling out all these things. I mean, even with starting with the Civil War, right? Since they started slavery. And then afterwards, it's been a very, very slow, gradual change that has allowed for more and more rights for people who are considered non-whites, right?
Yeah.
And if you even look today, there are a lot of people who are super successful, and you could say, I mean, how can you say that they're suffering from racism and systematic racism these days when you got people like Beyonce, Knowles, Jay-Z, right? There's a whole bunch, and there's a lot of other people. There's like Afro doctors, Afro lawyers, Afro engineers, Afro people in Hollywood, right? Afro, and you've got even politicians that are there in the government. So, and then on top of there's also successful Asians that are there, successful people who are in various different backgrounds. So to say that it's inherently racist today, no, not so much. No.
Yeah.
I think that getting better a lot. It's a lot. But honestly, I think that the current state of racism, both in the United States and in Canada today, is way less and it's way better than what it was 20 years ago, right?
Well, yeah, and that's one of those examples where we often say, that for almost all measures, things are always better today than they were, decades ago, right? But so it's one thing to say, first of all, is this a fairly new theory, this critical race theory? I don't remember growing up.
It is a fairly new theory,
okay,
in a way,
but it's been
not totally.
Okay.
Problem is, but if you look at the main premise, is that it's based upon a very Marxist ideology. Okay. It's essentially it's the whole idea of Marx. It's the Marxist idea of oppressor and oppressed that has been rehashed since Lenin. Okay, not since Lenin, since Marx, since Karl Marx. We talked about this a long time ago, and even there was one of the founders of Black Lives Matter who had basically they said that the book about critical race theory, someone made a comment on it saying that it looks like Mao's Red Book, right? And what happened is that founder of Black Lives Matter, who was very well versed in critical race theory, very versed in Marxist ideology, she was like, "Yo, yeah, it really is. Actually, yeah, that's awesome."
I was at the art publications table today, and I was speaking to this young person from Arizona who's trying to fight SB 1070. And he grabbed the book and he said, it's like Mao's Red Book. And I was like, man, that's what I was thinking. And it was just really cool to hear him make that connection. And I was like, how about you buy like 10 to 15 of these books and you all have like a youth like organizing group where you talk about it and you really try to engage this. And we can just we need to build off of this. And so that leads me to a point that I actually wanted to kind of focus on today, which is I think I have a really important role in speaking to youth. I have, maybe it's because I came in the movement at 17 and a half, so I have like just a knack for knowing how to organize young people into this organization and kind of teach them this politic and then hear them now organize other people.
Like, that's awesome. Does anyone know what happened there?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's confusing because on one hand, this critical race theory, the definition says that race is no more than just a social construct, right, used to oppress and exploit people. That alone, absolutely, doesn't make sense to me. But on the other hand, I do believe when people say things like, there's only one human race and we're all just different colors. That I believe. So the problem is that those are so closely, conflatable, right? Yes. That you can easily say, well, then there's no race then. Okay, well, if there's no race, there's, what I'm saying? Like, what am I trying to get out? I'm trying to get out the fact that you can on one hand say that there's no race, and then on one hand say that there's racism.
Yes, that's the thing. So you can't fight racism with more racism, and that's essentially what is happening with this. Okay. It fights racism with racism.
And right? Two wrongs never make a right.
No, if you want to fight, the only way to fight racism is to get people together and let them, get along with each other. That's all. I mean, if you go to
I have a funny joke for you. Yeah, if you want to get rid of racism, have people meet assholes from every race, so you know what an asshole is. It has nothing to do with their race. You know what I mean? It's just
and let them meet all the good people from that race too.
Exactly.
Right.
So that we're all just humans. We all have good days and bad days, and
exactly. Ebony and Ivory, just like that song by Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder, right?
Yeah. See, but critical race theory, and a lot of people are saying that is dangerous, and I actually am starting to believe that it can be quite dangerous because it's another tool to segregate people or to say this team A, team B, you know what I mean? And as long as you're going to say team A and team B, you have to pick a side, and I don't like that.
And the problem with that is that's the same tactic that the CCP used, like during the communist revolution. Mao used that tactic. You were either an imperialist or you were a cultural revolutionist. Okay. And they had that was called the Cultural Revolution back in China in those days. We have something similar that's going on now. It's called the Culture War. Because in every revolution there is a war, right? So at that time there was a culture war where you had the imperialists versus the revolutionists, and if you were labeled as a counter-revolutionist, right, you could lose like everything, like your name, your reputation, you probably won't get a job or stuff like that. So you were really put down a lot and it was be slandered. Yeah. So that happened in China, and there are people who are doing it today. We use but in this case, it's people who are either white or not white, or you have white privilege or you don't have white privilege. And the problem with the idea of what white privilege and all that stuff, it's they've made it very clear now. White privilege has nothing to do with your race. White privilege is just a label that they stick on you, like counter-revolutionist, because you don't agree with the people who are part of the revolution.
Yeah, right? Your eyes will put a red X on you. You're just you're the against.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. They'll say, like, if you're a woman and you're not a feminist, they'll say that you have internalized misogyny, right? If it's like, or if you're a
by simply if you don't support Black Lives Matter, but you happen to still love Black people, right, and support like everybody else, then it's not enough. I know what you're saying. It's not enough sometimes for some people.
Well, the KKK used to do this, right? And they used to use the same type of technique where if a white person was thought that there were good Afro folks, right? Okay. That they said that that person has some sort of like it had some internal race hate against himself, right?
Okay.
So, or they were against the and then
Like
it's the
white
same
guilt or something.
idea, it's the same idea that the feminists would use, the third, not the first or second wave, but the third or fourth wave ones. They'll say that a woman who is not a feminist has internal misogyny,
Yeah.
right?
Well, see, that's the extreme, right? If you're not with us now, you're against us.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. It's completely ideological, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then the thing, and there are lots of women who are not feminists, and there are a lot of women who are against particularly third and fourth wave feminists.
Yeah.
Right? And most of them are older women, and the thing is, what you see with all these older women is they're more experienced. And I know of one particular lady who was giving a talk on how feminism has failed women, and there were a lot of the young girls who were listening to her were laughing at her as they're saying, did you hear her? Honestly, how could she even believe that? She's so stupid. She's such an idiot. And then what happens is 10 years later down the line, these girls come back to her and like, you know what, ma'am, you were right.
Well, it's the age old saying, like, your parent, you find out later in life that your parents were right about this, about that, right? You find out later in life that the old people were right. And if you think about it from a self-aware standpoint, now it makes complete sense. My God, they had 20 years, 30 years of experience on you, 40 years.
Exactly. I mean, I can say the same thing. My grandmother, right? I mean, a good example, my grandmother, God bless her soul, right? She used to, this is an old story I've told over and over again before, but she would, when my family came here to Canada, right? She told my mother and father, don't speak to him in Sinhalese, which is my parents' native language. Only speak to him in English. Don't feed him rice and curry. Only feed him chicken and potatoes.
Yeah.
Right?
Because like Canadian.
Because like essentially be like the Canadians. For the longest time, when I was a teenager, when I was my earlier age, after my grandmother had passed away, she passed away when I was 10. After she passed away, I was scratching my head. I'm like, why would grandma say this? Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't speak with my cousins because my cousins back in Sri Lanka who didn't speak English. I can't talk to them because I have to like play charades with them, right? And it's hard. I'm trying to struggle with my broken Sinhalese that I picked up here and there. And the food, my grand auntie Mary's food, right? Spicy as heck. God bless her soul, but she made her food, like I thought my mom's food was spicy, but hers is like holy cannolis, right? It's really, really spicy. I'd be drinking water after water, and my second cousins are like saying, Desmond needs a fire hydrant, right? So I was like, why is she doing this? So then years later, I kind of figured out, because when I was a kid, the majority of folks in Canada, especially when my grandmother was still alive, the majority of people in Canada were white, right? And they had no exposure to South Asian culture and all that stuff. Even the Afro folks had no exposure to South Asian culture. So
it was like the new land for everybody, right?
Yeah. So and it's like the same thing, like when the Italians came to Canada for the first time, or when the Jews came for the first time, or when there's some ethnic background that comes to this country for the first time, they get they're seen as something new they've never experienced before, right? So like even said food from the Jewish community that I would thought would be pretty regular, right? With back then they thought it was like exotic type of thing, right? But and the thing is, there was a lot of discrimination against South Asians, and there was one kid I remember who didn't do like that, right? Just did the way that things were like back in his country, didn't have any type of cultural acceptance of he wasn't able to fit in cultural
assimilation a bit.
I didn't have any kind of assimilation whatsoever, and he ended up being treated very badly, right? I'm not saying that he should have been treated badly, but the thing is, Yeah, there's certain social norms, at least.
You're right. My dad tells me stories, and my uncles and aunts tell me stories when they came to Canada. You're right. It wasn't, hey, it wasn't peaches and cream for everybody. The
No.
Italians were called wops. Every group was called something. There was discrimination for sure. Like the Germans, Italians, the Spanish, the French, everybody who came,
Yep.
Right. So it's like discrimination is different also than racism, right? Discrimination is definitely different than systemic racism. These are very different terms, right?
Yeah, but they're all forms of discrimination.
Exactly, they're all forms of discrimination, right? And then also the term discrimination gets thrown around so much that it doesn't even let you say there's actual good times to this. Sometimes we do need to discriminate. You can't even use that word anymore for any reason. But the problem with this critical race theory, like other things, and I think with like some of the feminist movement that one would deem dangerous, one would deem extreme, is that it hurts females in the same way critical race theory will hurt minorities if it's applied poorly. And if it's,
Yeah.
like if it's applied at all, I think it will hurt minorities, because if you say that here's my opinion, I don't know anything, but if you say that you're in a system where you're automatically repressed, right, by the founding fathers, set up a system of oppression for every minority to come forward, how are you ever going to get anywhere, right? Like,
the problem is that critical race theory, I think, has less to do with race and has more to do with oppressor versus oppressed,
yeah,
more than anything. Because if, as I go into my previous point, that the founder of one of the founders of Black Lives Matter said that the book on critical race theory, it was very much comparable to Mao's Red Book, right? But if you look at it, it's oppressor and oppressed, but the oppressor and oppressed in Mao's Red Book was based on class.
yeah.
So you had the nobles and then you had the commoners, right? In Mao's world in China, and then you had
sorry to interrupt you, but that's the thing people don't realize oftentimes, is that these revolutions, they were popular. It wasn't by swords. People believed this.
And it happened over time, right? Very, very gradually, very slowly. And the thing is that there was one Chinese mother who came, because the school boards down south are trying to teach this stuff. And there was a mother who was originally from China, who lived through Mao's revolution and all that when she was a little girl. Wow. And the thing is, her name, when translated into English, means West, but the term West was it basically meant associated with imperialism, right?
Oh, okay.
And she really, really wanted to change her name so badly. But now, when she's older, she says, "I'm so thankful to my mother that my mother and father didn't let me."
Wow.
Right? And she now lives in the United States, and she is fighting heavily against communism and Marxism, and any form of it. And what she sees is that this critical race theory is very, very much like communist, like Mao's communist revolution in China, mainland China.
I've been very alarmed about what's going on in our school. You are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. During the Cultural Revolution, I witnessed students and teachers turn against each other. We changed school names to be politically correct. We were taught to denounce our heritage. The Red Guards destroy anything that is not communist, old statues, books, and anything else. We are also encouraged to report on each other, just like the Student Equity Ambassador Program and the bias reporting system. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our schools.
Yeah. Now, where did Mao get the idea from? Is that from the Marx-Lennox kind of?
It's basically, it's Maoist communism is evolution. It evolves from eventually evolves from Marx's original form of Marxism. There are various different forms. There's Lenin's form, there's Stalin's form, there's Mao's form, and but the very fundamentals are essentially the same. And a good example of a organization that uses critical race theory is Black Lives Matter Incorporated. They are heavy into it. They are openly, and they openly confirmed trained Marxists. And on top of that, if you want to understand how it will work, what happens in most of these communist regimes or communist communities is that unless you have, like I said before, unless you've got some Jesus Christ Buddha type of figure or Siddhartha Gautama type of figure leading the thing, you're gonna have the leader at the top who gets the castle and the mansion and all that stuff. Money. And all the people who fought for that movement, they're pushed down to the bottom, and they get like the thatched roof hut type of scenario, right?
People never believe that though. Why? People every time I turn my head, I hear examples of people are saying to me, "Hey, it could happen. It's happened over here. It's happened over here." You know, Russia, perfect example, USSR, and all these places in China. But at the same time, like, what are the young people, or what are the people? It's mostly young people, right, that are pushing for communism.
Because they don't have any experience in this. They don't know what it is. They never lived through it. They're being taught by other people certain stories that aren't true, right?
Well, and academia has been riddled with theories like this.
Yes, and on top of that, they have, and because they're being taught in universities, well, a whole bunch of hogwash. It doesn't matter if you're educated or not. If you're educated based on garbage, your education is worth garbage. You're not
worse because smarter. It's worse because it turns into brainwashing. Because now you think you're righteous enough that what you were taught was right.
Exactly, that's the problem.
That comes with that confidence. It's terrible.
It's the confidence in that so-called knowledge, but that knowledge is false knowledge. Is the problem? It's not factual. As for instance, and the only people who would actually know about it are people who lived through it, right? I know of one particular person who says that she knows what racism is, but she came to this country only like 5 years ago, right? 5-10 years ago. And she's young, like she was young, like I never experienced racism in this country in her life for real. And she was under the impression that she knew what racism is. And then she tried to tell me what it is. Me, I've actually lived through this country since the day I was born, back in '78. And I've been able to, I faced racism along with my mother, my father, you know. And if I say anything, it's way better now. I mean, I can look at my son, and he doesn't even have the slightest idea of what experience of racism is. He doesn't even have the slightest idea of how to experience sad things. Things are so perky for kids these days.
Well, I have a question for you. So compare what we, as I'm saying this, it's hard to define it, but compare what we define or the media defines as racism today, right? A typical, you want to call it textbook, black versus white, or any color versus color. What is the difference between that racism, if someone today, a black person doesn't like a white person or vice versa, okay? Compare that with 1960, my dad and his brothers came from the boat from Italy. They went to work at the steel plant or what have you, and they were told, you damn wops, get out of here. Isn't that the same?
That's the same thing.
That's the same thing. So it wasn't racism back then, or maybe it was, but
that is a form of race. That is a form of racism.
I guess my question is that, I mean, we handled that in a different way. We handled that by explaining to people what's right and wrong. Church or your family or whatever, teachers and everything. But now it's like we have this theory. This explains your conflict, Jimmy and Joey.
And the problem is that instead of using personal experience, we're having academics who are dictating what things are.
Theoretical explanation.
To a bunch of kids who have no experience with this at all.
Exactly.
And instead of listening to people who actually have experience in it, they're listening to some hippie professor, because that's what these guys are. They're hippies, most of them. They're hippie professors who are now dictating to them their theories about something. And most of these guys have never experienced racism in their entire lives. The majority of them are all white, right? I mean, there are, yes, there are a few who have written papers that are in their Afro folks, right? Like for instance, when it comes to intersectionality was written by an Afro lady, right? But the paper on that, but yeah, critical race theory itself, and a lot of the other stuff, other stuff is being written by people who never really experienced it per se, right?
The other thing that drives me crazy is that what if they say that I believe that racism is taught, right? Whether it's taught at the home or whether it's taught at the school or wherever it is, it's actually taught. So if it is taught, then the idea of that critical race theory, that even more picks holes in my idea, because it's obviously taught poorly, or it's in the small houses or in the small minority or the small examples of racism. Because obviously, if racism was the norm, we would have chaos.
Yeah, I know.
Chaos, and people don't realize that either. I think it's such a small. It must
the fact that you and I are talking like this.
We've been friends since '90s.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we went to high school back in the '90s.
Exactly.
Right? I did experience like a few bits of racism here and there, right? Yeah. Not necessarily from you or a lot of the people Basil's, but the high school we went to. Yeah. But there was a lot of people who were ignorant because
that's mostly right.
That was a lot of people because that town was mostly all white, right? Yeah. And they had never seen a brown person in their life, right? Yeah. But there were people in the Sioux who were racist, but not everyone was racist. I mean, we had very nice neighbors, and when I remember our next door neighbors, when their daughter asked them, she was a little itty bitty girl, right? And she'd never seen a brown person in her life. Like she's like 2 or 3, right? 3 years old, 4 years old, and she's like, "Mommy, Daddy, why are the neighbors brown?" And they explain, oh, because their family their ancestors come from a very warm country in the tropical area. There's a lot of sun. So because this very sunny, they ended up getting darker. So, and over time, they ended up being darker so that that's why they don't need to use sunscreen as much, right? Yeah. Because they're adapted for that, and that's why they're darker. We come from a place which was much colder with less sun, so that's why we're lighter. And that's it. And she's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the mother was like, despite that little difference, they're pretty much the same as us.
Well, and that's a pivotal point, right? Every single child, probably in every single family, in every single house in America or in the world, has a moment right there to make a decision. Are you going to be a bigot and a racist, or are you going to be a good human being, right? You could say, well, they're garbage. That's what those people are, whatever race, right? Or they're insert your slander. So, but at that point, so I understand it is taught for sure. I understand that some families it's been taught from generation, and it's a terrible thing, right? And I never want to stop fighting racism. So let's clear that up. We always need to fight racism when it's presented, right? And nip it in the bud.
Yeah, but you do that by talking about it.
By talking about it, yes.
Yeah, you can't
not having a policy.
Yeah, not by beating somebody, not by forcing someone, right? If you try to force something on someone, you're never going to win you're not really winning.
Never, ever.
If you can convince somebody truly, not by violence, but by actually being able to convince them through an argument. Yeah. That's when you actually made a point.
Exactly.
There are a lot of times when I argued with my own dad. My dad had certain beliefs that he had, and I would argue with my father. And when I made a good point, and my dad would always have this thing. I used to in Sinhalese, the word bakamuna means owl, right? And there is a old nursery rhyme that it basically goes bakamuna, bakamuna, It means the owl goes hoo. The owl goes hoo. And then there's this long verse that's in Sinhalese that I really don't understand what it was, because my mother say that and she knows what it is. But my dad had this habit. Whenever he got stumped, he'd be like, So I'm like, oh, bakamuna.
Bakamuna, I like that. Well, that's close to bacala, Italian.
What was that?
It's close to the Italian word bacala, which means codfish.
But yeah, this is bakamuna is not an insult in Sinhalese.
Oh no, yeah.
No, it just means owl, right? It's just that he always made that noise whenever he got stumped. Yeah. So, but the thing is, that's when I knew that the gears were turning in his head. Yeah. And that's when, like, whatever the case, but like, for instance, on the theory of evolution versus creationism, my father took the creation story very literally, and I took it from a more, how I put it, a more symbolic sense, right?
Yeah.
But I still believed in the theory of evolution, with, of course, with God involved. Me being, because I'm being Christian, but then also, you know, the Big Bang theory and all that, God being involved. I never believed that either of those theories ever disproved God. My father, for some reason, thought that.
Okay.
But I said no, it doesn't, and I tried explaining to him, and then he's like, right? And
Yeah.
then he starts thinking, and then that's when and then he started changing. Now he thinks of the Bible in symbolic sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean the creation story of it, and that's when you know that you've won the argument in that sense, because you have been able to convince that person.
Yeah. You can't force it.
Point, right?
Oh, exactly. And perfect example of any argument with your wife or your spouse or any, like, you're not going to force things. You're not going to make people change their mind, right? It's people change their own mind when presented information that seems good to them, right?
Exactly.
It seems enticing or valuable to change their mind, then they will.
The only thing that violence is going to do is build more violence. If you have someone who you don't like or you disagree with, and you go and you punch them or kick them or hit them or beat them, what that's going to make them feel is they're going to feel first, you know, apprehension, fear, pain, but then also anger, hatred, and then they're going to turn violent. And there's a possibility that they can turn violent too, right?
So how do we combat, like, critical race theory? How do we combat? I mean, because there's people that are speaking up now in the States, right? They're trying to teach it in certain school boards, and parents are speaking out. Definitely. I mean, I don't think they should be taught here, but it's going to be taught here soon, right?
The government, members who are trying to push this stuff have a motive to do so, because what they're doing is this is divide and conquer, right? Mao did it to his own people. The Democrats are doing it down south, right? And they're basically using that to try and split people up.
That's a good point. Oftentimes people will say, well, a leader would never do that. A government would never do that.
Of course,
every atrocity has happened by its own government, usually.
Exactly. I mean, look, I mean, the people in China who supported Mao didn't think that there'd be atrocities that will be created afterwards. But look what's happening now.
Same with Nazis, right?
In the Nazis too. The Nazis never thought that there'd be atrocities when they first started. The German people never thought that the Nazi Party would have atrocities when they first started, and they did, right?
Just escalate so quickly.
It's like the old saying goes: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah. Right. So that's where being able to be perceptive and being able to, it's not just knowledge, but being able to not look forward, but look back on what has happened to gain wisdom and experience from what has already happened, and then use that to combat, you know, be able to discern what's good for the future. Because just blindly going forward is not going to help you, especially when you're going towards a cliff, a proverbial one, but still a cliff nonetheless, right?
Exactly. Well, and here's the danger too, right? You remove certain classes on history, certain classes on world history, you know, religious history, and you replace them with certain classes on, you know, certain critical race theories, or just, you know, these new type of psychology.
Yeah, they're trying to rewrite everything.
Exactly. And then next thing you know, there's a whole generation 20 years later, and literally it's going to be wiped off the face of the earth, because if they're, you know, I'll make a bet here, in 20 or 30 years from now, Facebook's going to be the encyclopedia. And if there's not a Facebook record of it, there's not going to be a record of it.
Yeah. Right? But Facebook is an encyclopedia. It's like Wikipedia. Anyone can post anything on Wikipedia.
But where's I think that we're going through right now. I'm afraid that we're going to go through our fire of Alexandria, of the Library of Alexandria, because what, you know what I mean? What happens if we lose our information? Like, I guess the Bible, as long as we don't lose the Bible and things like that, good reference points.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? About the whole idea of like losing history, like if all it takes is a group of people to not be taught about World War II, and then their kids won't know about World War II. Holy cow.
Yeah, it's a big mess, and then you can repeat the whole thing all over again, because the next generation doesn't know what happened before, right?
Yeah.
So, and they need to be taught it from an objective standpoint. Not every, and they have to understand that. And I mean, there's one movie that I think it was Saving Private Ryan, I think it was, that really brought out what it was like to be behind the lines in Nazi Germany. You had a bunch of American soldiers who went to try and bring back this private home, right? And so that there is one very well-known fight where between an American soldier and a Nazi soldier, German Nazi soldier, and the thing is, they really don't want to fight, right?
You can't blame
But
them.
that's their job.
They're human.
And they both of them, so you can see both of them, they see each other, they're freaking scared of each other.
Yeah.
And they know that they have to fight,
As you
right? So then they fight and they try to kill each other, right?
Crazy.
Eventually, the German soldier pins down the American soldier and starts slowly shoving a knife into his chest. While he's doing that, he's like, while the American guy is like
getting killed.
like this, the German guy's okay, just
Oh man,
that's not right. It's like
that's
it's
heartbreaking.
messed up, and all because of some people at the top, because some government told them
Yeah,
go fight
and that's the thing, right?
on both sides.
Exactly, and that's the thing that we need to hit home. This can escalate so quickly and so dangerously that before you know it, people are going to sit around 20 years from now. Hopefully, there's never a war like that again, but theoretically, you can sit around 20 or 30 years from now going, how did they let that happen? A country like Canada, a country like the US, how did they let, they were the beacon of freedom and all that stuff. So I'm glad that me and you are speaking out. We need to bang our drum. But I don't know, maybe we can wrap this up. What do you think about, we'll just speak up, right? If this is being taught in our schools, our kids' schools, speak up.
Just speak up, go to your local, parents have to speak up.
Yeah.
Parents have to speak up. Parents have to stop this from happening.
School councils and stuff.
It is going to, I mean, if Black Lives Matter's founders are saying that the book on critical race theory looks like Mao's Red Book, that should be a freaking flag right there, a humongous red flag with a freaking hammer and sickle on it, So that should be a huge red flag if they're saying it. And we've got a clip on that. I can show that.
Yeah, let's add that for sure.
Yeah.
All right. That's it. That's all I got, Des.
Yeah. So we'll see you guys. Thanks you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Peace.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Hi, and thanks for watching this episode of Centerville Voice. If you like what you see, don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're watching this on YouTube, also click on the notifications icon to make sure you'll get notified on all of our new episodes every Friday. By sharing and liking this episode and all of our episodes, it really helps to promote the channel. And by sharing these episodes, it helps to promote our word and get the word out. If you like what you see and hear, please consider becoming one of our supporters on Patreon. 10% of all Patreon supporter donations we receive go directly to our Charity of the Year. This year, our Charity of the Year is the Terry Fox Foundation. You can visit us at centervillevoice.com to learn more and engage with us on one of our social media platforms. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you again in the next episode. Peace.